the original OCP. It first hit the shelves in 1960, see?
Are you ready to indulge in a sweet journey down memory lane? Today, we're uncovering the top 25 pleasing desserts that'll transport baby boomers back to the golden age of decadent treats. So grab your sweet tooth and let's dive into nostalgia. Number 25. Cream pies. Baby boomers, remember those heavenly cream pies that grace dinner tables with their whipped cream-topped goodness? Can we just take a moment here to wax reverential about the single-crusted, whipped cream-topped, custard-based wonder that is a cream pie? The cream pie came into existence as a way of using up surplus eggs and milk products from the family farm. Think buttermilk pie, chess pie, and sugar cream pies, and blossomed into ubiquity as the shelf-stable cocoa, coconut, and bananas became more and more widely available. By the mid-20th century, mile-high cream pies had become one of the defining features of classic diner culture. If cream pies have lost ground in the intervening decades, it can only be because so many other desserts have cropped up to distract us, and that just seems wrong. So let's bring them back, starting with our surprisingly healthy recipe for coconut cream pie. Number 24. German Black Forest Cake. Calling all baby boomers with a sweet tooth, remember sinking your teeth into layers of chocolate cake, cherries, and whipped cream? Along with fairy tales and mountaintop castles, Germany's Black Forest region is known as the namesake, if not the origin, of the country's most luscious cake. Dating back to 16th century Germany, dark rounds of chocolate cake are doused in a cherry syrup, spiked with Kirschwasser, a sour cherry brandy, then stacked atop a thin chocolate base with deep layers of whipped cream and fresh cherries. If that wasn't flavor enough, the whole thing is swathed in more cream, dusted with shaved chocolate and studded with cherries. The resulting cake is a frothy dream dessert that's the star of pastry cases around Germany, where it's known as a Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte. By the middle of the 20th century, it was Germany's best-known cake and had also become well-known in the US, particularly in cities popular among German émigrés. These days, Black Forest cake has all but disappeared from the mainstream, although we did find this recipe from Sally's Baking Addiction, and fans of the arguably perfect combination of chocolate and cherry can get their fix with our recipe for molten lava chocolate cherry cake. Number 23. French Fruit Tarts. Do you recall the elegant French fruit tarts that adorn dessert carts with their vibrant colors and buttery crusts? Speaking of cream pies, who else remembers the classic French fruit tart, which was essentially a single-crusted custard pie topped with sugar-glazed fresh fruit? Back in the 1980s, this slender, colorful, mildly flavored sweet was a staple of dessert carts and also managed to pass as a brunch selection at some of the fancier hotels. Classy and elegant, this fruit tart features a buttery and flaky French pâté sucré or sweet tart crust and homemade pastry cream. Then it is finished with any of the fresh fruits of your choice. You definitely wanted to get as much color as possible and show off the brightness of the fruit that is in season in Germany. To make this dessert even better, 3 different French macarons can be added to complement some of the fruit flavors that are featured in this tart: strawberry cheesecake, blackberry mascarpone, and lemon with a homemade lemon curd filling. Maybe it wasn't the healthiest brunch choice, but the French fruit tart certainly was, and remains an attractive, delicious vehicle for fresh berries. Let's start putting this back on dessert plates today. Number 22. Southern-style banana pudding. Who could forget the comforting layers of vanilla custard, bananas, and wafers in Southern-style banana pudding? In the South, banana pudding is neither banana nor pudding. It's vanilla custard layered with banana slices and vanilla wafers. The wafers become delightfully soggy, like the Ritz crackers in old-fashioned mock apple pie or the chocolate wafers in icebox cake. It's no secret that Southerners love banana pudding, but bananas hail from the tropics, and the first mention of the layered dessert came from not the South, but from the New York Times in 1878, according to food historian Robert Moss for Serious Eats. So why did the dish become a Southern staple? Moss's theory is simple. Like many other potluck and picnic favorites or pastimes perfected in the South, banana pudding easily feeds a crowd. The first known banana pudding recipe, from an 1888 issue of Good Housekeeping, called for custard layered with sponge cake and sliced bananas, served in a pretty dish. In the 1940s, Nabisco began printing a variation of the recipe on its vanilla wafer boxes, establishing the cookie as a key ingredient. The dessert made its way up to the moon in freeze-dried form on the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. Number 21. Apple Crisp. Baby boomers, remember the warm cinnamon-scented comfort of Apple Crisp? Comfort food made of stewed apples and topped with a sweet, crumbly granola-like crust? Is there anything better? Apple Crisp caught on during the 20th century as an alternative to apple pie. and became hugely popular in the 1980s when Americans learned President Reagan was a fan of its southern cousin, Apple Brown Betty. Its popularity as a vehicle for vanilla ice cream was later eclipsed by bread pudding and all its iterations. But apples are much more nutritious than bread, especially if you don't peel them, so this one gets our vote for a well-deserved comeback. Apple Crisps were first mentioned in a cookbook in 1924. The cookbook's name, Everybody's Cookbook, a comprehensive manual of home cookery by Isabel Eli Lord. When it comes to traditional or old-fashioned, this isn't really true. This isn't a recipe that has been passed down by your family or anyone else's for generations because, quite frankly, it hasn't been around that long. Crisps tend to incorporate baked apples with a batter of sugar, flour, oats, and nuts. It tends to be crispier than a cobbler, hence the name. Number 20. Fruit Cobbler. Calling all baby boomers who crave the buttery, biscuit-topped goodness of fruit cobbler. When it comes to summer desserts, there's nothing more classic than a pie. Warm, bubbly fruit encased in a buttery, flaky crust. There's nothing better. Well, almost nothing. There are actually a number of baked goods that we think might just take the crown away from pie, like crumbles, crisps, slumps, and more, bonus no finicky pie crusts. One of our absolute faves, gotta be the cobbler. A cobbler is a baked fruit dessert in which a fruit filling is covered by flaky biscuits, then baked all together. The biscuits are usually scattered on top of the fruit filling, giving the overall visual of a cobbled road, hence the name. Like Apple Crisp, fruit cobblers have found themselves unfairly upstaged by the constant parade of newer and richer takes on dessert. Hello, Cronut, we're talking about you. But just because these fruit cobblers aren't so easy to find these days, that doesn't mean that you can't make this tasty, biscuit-topped fruit dessert at home, especially if you happen to have a wonderful recipe handy. Number 19. Apple Turnover. Even if you've never considered eating an apple turnover out of your hand, it's still at heart a hand pie. Hand-sized and portable, hand pies have been around since ancient times, although it appears no one thought to use apples in puff pastry until sometime during the 19th century. Apple turnovers, handheld golden flaky puff pastry, and it's stuffed with warm cinnamon apple cubes and a syrupy caramel sauce. You can't really go wrong whichever path you're down for serving. But options are a good thing, because wouldn't life be boring if we all liked the same thing? The turnover and its endless variants have been around for centuries. Each nation seems to have its own variation of the pastry. Spanish empanadas, Chinese dim sum, Indian samosas. The list is virtually endless. The fillings vary with the region and seasonal availability, but the basic folded pastry dough encasing sweet or savory fillings does not. Number 18. Molten chocolate cake. Baby boomers, remember the decadent allure of molten chocolate cake with its gooey center oozing with rich chocolate?
That shit was molten! It's fucking molten! Asshole!
Molten chocolate cake, sometimes known as lava cake, is a chocolate cake with a thick, warm, lava-like chocolate center that erupts when the cake is cracked with a fork. It was first introduced to Americans in the 1980s at top-tier French restaurants in New York City. Most of those restaurants are long gone, and you don't see lava cake around much anymore either. French chef Michael Bras said that he invented the cake in 1981, after 2 years of experimentation, with his original inspiration being a family group warming themselves up after a skiing trip by drinking hot chocolate. French chef and chocolatier Jacques Torres confirms that such a dessert existed in France in the 1980s. French chef Jean-Georges Van Gerichten, for his part, said that he invented the dish in New York City in 1987. He recalled pulling a chocolate sponge cake from the oven before it was done and finding that the center was still runny, but warm with both a good taste and texture. He has been credited with popularizing the molten chocolate cake in the United States, where it became an almost de rigueur inclusion on high-end restaurant dessert menus in the 1990s. The two recipes are not at all similar, even though the resulting dish is. Bras' recipe is made in 2 parts, a frozen ganache core covered by a rich starch dough and baked in a mold. Von Gerichten's recipe is simpler, a chocolate cake batter made from normal flour, baked briefly in a very hot oven. The flowing chocolate center is therefore arrived at differently in 2 different recipes, but Von Gerichten's has proved more popular, being easier to produce. Number 17. Bananas Foster. Bananas Foster, in which bananas are sautéed in a combination of sugar, butter, and rum, and then set aflame, briefly, to burn off only the alcohol content. The bananas and sauce are then served over the ice cream. Popular toppings also include whipped cream and different types of nuts, or pecans, walnuts, etc. The dish is often prepared tableside as a flambé. It quickly caught fire through the rest of the country, but over the intervening decades, enthusiasm for the theatrical dessert has waned. Though many think the dish was created at the restaurant Brennan's in New Orleans, Louisiana, it actually got its start a few years earlier in Owens Brennan's Vieux Carré Café. In 1951, Ella Brennan and the restaurant chef Paul Blanchet worked together to modify a dish made by Ella's mother in the Brennan family home. At this time, New Orleans was a major hub for the import of bananas from South America. It was named for Richard Foster, the chairman of the New Orleans Crime Commission and a friend of restaurant owner Owen Brennan. Number 16. Traditional Coca-Cola cake. Remember the unique flavor and the moist texture of traditional Coca-Cola cake? Coca-Cola cake, which, as the name implies, is made using actual Coca-Cola, is a sweet, moist chocolate cake topped with sweet, gooey chocolate glaze. It first appeared as a printed recipe in the 1950s and enjoyed a comeback when Cracker Barrel added it to the menu in 1997. It's been keeping a fairly low profile these days, and we're not sure why, but we'd love to see that change. The original Coca-Cola cake recipe was published over a century ago in ladies' magazines. It's a moist, yet dense chocolate cake that's made with Coke and topped with a chocolate buttercream frosting. Adding the cup of Coke to this cake gives it an ultra-rich flavor. It really brings out the chocolate and adds an extra touch of sweetness. Number 15. Oatmeal cookies. Baby boomers, who could forget the comforting chewiness of oatmeal cookies, packed with raisins and spices? An oatmeal raisin cookie is a type of drop cookie made from an oatmeal-based dough with raisins. Its ingredients also typically include flour, sugar, eggs, salt, and spices. When cookies were becoming more prominent in the United States in the early 1900s, they came to be known as a health food because of the fiber and vitamins from the oatmeal and raisins. Nonetheless, the nutritional value of an oatmeal raisin cookie is essentially the same as a chocolate chip cookie in sugar and calorie content. Depending on how many raisins or oats are added, the fiber and fat content may not be much different either. Oatmeal cookies have been around far longer than chocolate chip cookies. But while they've had their moments in the spotlight, oatmeal cookies have always been the Jan to chocolate chip cookies Marcia, and fans of television's early 70s hit The Brady Bunch know that it's always Marcia, Marcia, Marcia. The thing is, we're also fans of Jan, which is to say, we believe oatmeal cookies have gotten a raw deal. Let's give them a little love, even if it means adding some chocolate chips to the batter. Number 14. Malt shop style milkshakes. Speaking of ice cream concoctions, let's not forget the old-fashioned milkshakes they used to make to order in malt shops from days gone by. You'd sit at the counter, order your shake, and watch as the soda jerk, as he was called without derision, grabbed a metal shaker, plopped in some vanilla ice cream, squirted in some flavored syrup, and then whipped up your milkshake using an old-fashioned milkshake machine. These days, milkshakes tend to be churned out like soft serve from pre-made mixes at fast food joints. But who's to say you can't make them the good old-fashioned way yourself? Originally, malt sugar was prescribed as a dietary supplement because it was so easy to digest. In 1882, William Horlick found a way to make malt into a powder and combined it with evaporated milk to create the signature powder used for malted milk drinks. In 1922, Walgreens employee Ivar Pop Colson decided to add ice cream to malted milk, creating the first ever malted milkshake. It rose immensely in popularity during Prohibition, as customers were forced out of saloons and into ice cream parlors and soda shops. Number 13. Baked Alaska. One of America's most iconic desserts, Baked Alaska is ice cream surrounded by cake surrounded by meringue that's either browned quickly in the oven or given the flambé treatment tableside. Baked Alaska attained its peak popularity in the mid-20th century, but because it's essentially ice cream cake enveloped in meringue, which consists of sweetened whipped egg whites, and offers an occasion to create quite a spectacle if you decide to go the flambé route. We can't figure out why it's not more widely available these days. A Baked Alaska features cool ice cream on top of a sponge cake, completely covered with meringue, and baked quickly in the oven to brown. As legend has it, Thomas Jefferson served an ice cream and meringue dish very similar to today's version of Baked Alaska in the White House in 1802. The final recipe, meanwhile, is said to have been created and named by French chef Charles Ronhofer at Delmonico's in New York to celebrate the purchase of Alaska in 1867. Number 12. Crepe Suzette. Remember the flamboyant presentation of crepe Suzette with its flambéed orange liqueur sauce? Crepe Suzette is another fun, fancy flambé dessert from days gone by. Perfect in its simplicity, it's a crepe doused in butter and orange-flavored liqueur, and then set dramatically aflame to burn off most of the alcohol in the liqueur while imparting a deep orange flavor into the dessert itself. The origin of the dish and its name is disputed. One claim is that it was created from a mistake made by a 14-year-old assistant waiter, Henri Charpentier, in 1895 in the Maitre at Monte Carlo's Café in Paris. He was preparing a dessert for the future King Edward VII of the United Kingdom, then Prince of Wales, whose guests included a beautiful French girl named Suzette. This story was told by Charpentier himself in Life à la Henri, his autobiography, although later contradicted by the Larousse Gastronomique. Number 11. Pineapple Upside Down Cake. Although Hawaii didn't become a state until 1959, by 1906, James Dole had built his first pineapple cannery, and by the 1920s, canned pineapple had become so ubiquitous in the United States that pineapple upside down cake, so named because when it's baking, the pineapple is at the bottom of the cake, became a trend. This pineapple upside down cake is soft and buttery, with a caramelized brown sugar pineapple and cherry topping. Its juices sink deep down into the cake, adding even more luscious flavor and texture. It is then baked and flipped out onto a platter so the bottom becomes the top, hence the name upside down. A classic favorite using canned pineapple and maraschino cherries, this retro cake is served upside down and perfect any time of year. Sometimes nuts and maraschino cherries are also added. Number 10. Chocolate Fondue. Fondue dates back to 17th century Switzerland, but traditionally it was made with cheese. Fondue is the ever-amazing art of dipping fruit, cheese, cooked meat, cake, bread, and whatever else takes your fancy into warm melted cheese or chocolate. The word fondue is French. It comes from the past particle of the verb fondre, which means to melt. But fondue itself is Swiss, specifically from the western part of Switzerland where French is spoken. Here's some bonus trivia for you. Switzerland has 4 official languages, which are German, French, Italian, and Romanish. English, while not an official language, is also widely spoken. The very first fondue recipe is found in a recipe book published in Zurich, Switzerland in 1699. It calls for a blend of melted cheese and wine in which you dip bread. Chocolate fondue was invented in New York City in the early 1960s by a Swiss, immediately becoming a huge trend among the hip, giving rise to fondue parties and restaurants devoted entirely to fondue. Conrad Egli, owner of the restaurant Chalet Suisse, wanted to add a dessert version of fondue to the menu. His version of chocolate fondue had chocolate, heavy cream, and kirsch, a type of cherry brandy that's originally from Germany. Today, chocolate fondue is rarely seen, which is unfortunate because it's fun to play with your food, and it's a delicious delivery system for fresh fruit. Number 9. German Chocolate Cake. Chocolate aficionados might take issue with the name German chocolate cake, because this very sweet and mild layer cake gets at least as much, if not more, flavor from pecans and coconut. Still others might take issue with the fact that German doesn't refer to the country, but to the last name of the guy who invented the particular baking chocolate with which this cake was first made. German chocolate cake, originally German's chocolate cake, is a layered chocolate cake filled and topped with a coconut pecan frosting. Originating in the United States, it was named after English-American chocolate maker Samuel German, who developed a formulation of dark baking chocolate that came to be used in the cake recipe. Sweet baking chocolate is traditionally used for the cake's flavor, but few recipes call for it today. The filling and/or topping is a custard made with egg yolks and evaporated milk. Once the custard is cooked, coconut and pecans are stirred in. Occasionally, a chocolate frosting is spread on the sides of the cake and piped around the circumference of the layers to hold in the filling. Maraschino cherries are occasionally added as a garnish. Nevertheless, German chocolate cake was an American favorite during the mid-20th century. It's rarely seen these days, having taken a backseat to far more chocolatey chocolate desserts. Number 8. Fresh berries with zabaione. Fresh berries with zabaione, also spelled zabaglione, is a traditional Italian dessert consisting of fresh berries drizzled generously with a custardy sauce composed of just 3 ingredients: egg yolks, sugar, and Marsala wine, although some variations use port wine or Moscato d'Asti. Although zabaione dates back to the 15th century Italy, it was causing quite a stir back in the late 1970s through the early 1980s, when it was as much a default dessert order for some as tiramisu seems to have become. Some even say that tiramisu derived from zabaione. Zabaione, spelled zablione by some Italians and all English speakers, is a classic sweet that you don't encounter much anymore on restaurant menus, let alone on home tables. That's a shame, because it's truly delicious and supremely versatile, equally suited to serve on its own as a sweet ending to an important meal, or a warm and substantial beverage drunk as a quick pick-me-up, or as a sauce fresh for fruit or cake. In the old days, it was thought to have restorative properties and was a favorite sweet treat for kids. The base recipe calls for only 3 ingredients that, at least in our house, are always on hand: eggs, sugar, and Marsala wine, and can be whipped up, and in this case I use the term literally, in just a few minutes. Zabaglione belongs to the family of custard-like sauces that use egg yolks to thicken a liquid, such as crema pasticcera, virtually identical except for the use of Marsala instead of milk, hollandaise sauce, and mayonnaise. All of these require some patience in adding the liquid to the egg yolks and, for the warm ones like Zabbione, care not to overheat and curdle the mixture. In this rendition, you whisk the egg, sugar, and wine constantly until it becomes more of a mousse than a custard. You need a rather strong arm if you're going to whisk by hand, but an electric whisk makes things almost effortless. Although it's hard to find today, you can make it yourself. Number 7. Fruitcake. We can't say fruitcake has ever been forgotten exactly. Fruitcake has always been around, and folks are very conscious of that around Christmas time. The problem is that many regard the prospect of eating fruitcake with at least some measure of trepidation, and that's putting it mildly. But it doesn't have to be that way. Fruitcake, when it's homemade with fresh ingredients, can be quite the revelation. Don't believe us? You could try making it yourself. The earliest recipe from ancient Rome lists pomegranate seeds, pine nuts, and raisins that were mixed into barley mash. In the Middle Ages, honey, spices, and preserved fruits were added. Fruitcake soon proliferated all over Europe. Recipes varied greatly in different countries throughout the ages, depending on the available ingredients, as well as, in some instances, church regulations forbidding the use of butter, regarding the observance of fasting. Pope Innocent VIII, from 1432 to 1492, finally granted the use of butter in a written permission known as the Butter Letter or Butter Brief in 1490, giving permission to Saxony to use milk and butter in the stolen fruitcakes. Starting in the 16th century, sugar from the American colonies and the discovery that high concentrations of sugar could preserve fruits created an excess of candied fruit, thus making fruitcakes more affordable and popular. The 17th century English fruitcake was originally yeast leavened, and the rum and dried fruit helped extend the shelf life of the cake. Number 6. Ice cream bread. Ice cream bread is the vintage dessert we all need to try, and it's making the rounds on TikTok. The recipe was found in a cookbook called Cookbook from 1974. The 1970s recipe going viral is called ice cream bread. The recipe made a comeback in 2005, and now with social media, it's having another moment. The recipe is very easy: ice cream and flour. You use 2 pints of ice cream, softened, and mix it with a cup and a half of flour. Top with sprinkles or not and bake. How well does this work? Well, ice cream is made of milk, eggs, and sugar, which are the ingredients you use to make sweet bread. Makes sense. The dessert on TikTok uses vanilla ice cream, but you can use any flavor. If sprinkles aren't your thing, you can use fruit, nuts, or whatever you'd like. Number 5. Surprise spice cake. Canned tomato soup replaces some of the oil in this spice cake, decreasing the fat, boosting the color, and enhancing the taste. Perfect for the holidays or as a cozy fall dessert, this spice cake recipe is a moist and flavorful treat. The cake is full of cozy spices and coated with a rich and tangy cream cheese frosting, making for a delightful dessert everyone will love. The tender crumb will melt in your mouth. Made with a combination of cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and nutmeg, this spice cake recipe is a rich and flavorful dessert that you won't be able to get enough of. This cake is so rich, soft, and moist thanks to the combination of oil, applesauce, and buttermilk, and it'll melt in your mouth. While the list of ingredients may seem long, this cake is also very easy to throw together. The batter itself doesn't even require a mixer. It's practically a foolproof recipe as it comes out tender and rich every time. It's way better than a box mix. Number 4. Jell-O. Jell-O was invented in the late 1800s, but it really took off around 1900. There were a few factors for its growth and popularity. Strategic advertising in magazines like Ladies' Home Journal and colored illustrations by notable artists like Maxfield Parrish and Norman Rockwell featuring Jell-O brought it to the attention of home cooks. The company began sampling and sharing recipes for the jeweled tone gelatin, and it's clearly only grown from there. The dessert was especially popular in the first half of the 20th century. The original gelatin dessert began in Leroy, New York in 1897, when Pearl Bixby Waite trademarked the name Jell-O. He and his wife May had made the product by adding strawberry, raspberry, orange, and lemon flavoring to sugar and granulated gelatin, which had been patented in 1945. The powder is mixed with boiling water and then cooled to produce a gel. The baby boom saw a significant increase in sales for Jell-O. Young mothers didn't have the supporting community structures of earlier generations, so marketers were quick to promote easy-to-prepare prepackaged foods. By this time, Creating a Jell-O dessert required simply boiling water, combining the water with Jell-O, and putting the mixture into Tupperware molds and refrigerating it for a short time. Number 3. Carrot cake. Calling all baby boomers who appreciate the wholesome goodness of carrot cake, with its moist crumb and creamy frosting. The 1970s were generally a more health-conscious era, and carrot cake was perceived as being a healthy dessert because of the addition of vegetables. Of course, it really wasn't. Heaps of sugar is baked into the cake, and it's topped with a cream cheese icing. We know better now, but we still enjoy it all the same. The origins of carrot cake are disputed. Published in 1591, there's an English recipe for pudding in a carrot root that is essentially a carrot stuffed with meat, but it includes many elements common to the modern dessert: shortening, cream, eggs, raisins, sweetener or dates and sugar, spices, clove and mace, scraped carrot, and breadcrumbs in place of flour. Many food historians believe carrot cake originated from such carrot puddings eaten by Europeans in the Middle Ages, when sugar and sweeteners were expensive and many people used carrots as a substitute for sugar. Variations of the carrot pudding evolved to include baking with a crust, such as pumpkin pie, steamed with a sauce, or molded in pans like plum pudding with icing. Number 2. Key lime pie. Baby boomers, remember the tangy sweetness of key lime pie? A refreshing slice of Florida sunshine on a plate? About the only fact Floridians know for sure is that Key West is where the key lime pie was invented. However, as reported by the Miami Herald by way of Food and Wine, author Stella Parks has made claims in her book Brave Tart, Iconic American Desserts, that the Borden Company created the key lime pie recipe to sell more sweetened and condensed milk around 1931 in their New York test kitchen. Though Parks's claim has been anecdotally refuted by some Key West residents, proof of an earlier Florida recipe hasn't been found. This debate has yet to be decided on the origins of lime-infused pie with a graham cracker crust. The best versions are, for sure, found in Key West restaurants and bakeries, like the version at Blue Haven with its towering pile of meringue. Number 1. Ice cream. And last but not least, baby boomers, let's celebrate the timeless joy of ice cream, that cool and creamy indulgence that never goes out of style. Buffalo milk, flour, and camphor made up the ingredients of the first ice cream-like dessert in China during the Tang Dynasty, which started in 618 CE. Versions of the cold treat have been prevalent throughout food history and were eaten by kings, explorers, and emperors, though they are much different from the creamy versions of today. By the end of the 19th century, the United States was involved in the mass production of ice cream, allowing the rise of American soda shops and the invention of the ice cream sundae. Modern versions of this sweet frozen food can use dairy products, soy, coconut, cashew, or almond milk combined with sugar or other sweeteners and flavors. Ready to get your cone on? So why not bring a taste of nostalgia into your kitchen? Dust off those old recipe cards, gather your ingredients, and whip up some of these classic desserts for a taste of nostalgia. Share your favorite vintage dessert memories with us and keep the conversation sweet. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. Until next time, stay tuned.